A grand jury convened by the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, who is a member of the Democratic Party, who was elected by an overwhelmingly liberal and Democratic electorate in New York City, voted to indict former President Trump. The charges specifically are not yet published, which means we don't know exactly what the charges are, but we know what this investigation is about. We know what the charges relate to. And it's something the public has known about for a long time, knew everything about this case when they went to the voting booth in November of 2016 and voted for Donald Trump despite knowing about this case. They knew about it throughout Trump's presidency, and they knew about it in 2020 when, despite the extraordinary harms of the COVID pandemic and the economic devastation accompanying the lockdowns, they almost reelected him. That was a very tightly contested election. The article in Time magazine that's now notorious basically acknowledges that the establishment and centers of power in the United States assembled and united in a previously unprecedented way to ensure his defeat, according to that Time magazine article. Virtually every major, powerful institution in the United States that wields significant influence, with a couple of exceptions only, not only was devoted to Trump's defeat and ensuring he didn't win, but actively conspired to ensure that it happens. We've many times gone over the extreme acts undertaken to ensure that Trump would not get reelected, including outright lies that were concocted from the bowels of the CIA and fed to the corporate media, which often mindlessly published them or even published them knowing that they were false. Things like the censorship, the brute censorship, not just by Twitter, but Facebook as well. The investigation into Joe Biden's activities, both in China and in Ukraine, that they published right before the election, Twitter and Facebook, citing lies told by the CIA and by the corporate media that this was Russian disinformation, suppressed it, prevented it from circulating, ensured that an unknown number of American voters, we'll never know how many, didn't hear of that story because it was barred from being disseminated on social media. As I said, most of the contested states were decided by tens of thousands of votes only. We'll never know whether that might have made the difference. So you could spend the entire show, as we've spent many months and my years before that doing written journalism, documenting the radical steps undertaken by the establishment in the United States to ensure that Trump's reelection could not happen, that it would be sabotaged, and they would do everything possible for Joe Biden to win. As many of you know, I saw that uphand when I was working inside a media outlet that is, although not perfectly defined as such, is part of the corporate media, which is The Intercept, a media outlet I founded back in 2013 with the funding from Pierre Omidyar, one of the richest men on the planet, and the founder of eBay, who became fanatical in his belief that Russiagate was true, that Trump had conspired with the Russians, that there had never been any evil greater than Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin in the history of the world, that this collusion that he thought had taken place was so corrupting that everything needed to be done to prevent it. And he devoted all of his resources from what he had previously been doing, which was a wide range of all kinds of political and apolitical activities, into a single-minded focus on ensuring that Donald Trump didn't win. And as a result, or not as a result directly, but at the same time, senior editors of The Intercept, like most senior editors at most corporate media outlets, were essentially unwilling to even report negatively on Donald Trump out of fear that it would help him get reelected or would help Joe Biden be defeated. They were afraid of what their colleagues and friends thought. They had their political ideology overwhelmingly suffocating and drowning out any sense of journalistic ethos. And just in case after case after case, the institutions of authority in the United States engaged in extremist conduct to ensure that Donald Trump would not win in 2020. But that was never enough. That was never enough. It has been, since Trump won the 2016 election, the number one priority of the Democratic Party and its leaders and of American liberalism writ large, by which I mean all the other institutions that became part of this establishment plot to sabotage Trump's reelection. And again, that's not my saying that there was a plot. The most mainstream of mainstream outlets, Time Magazine, the thing we all read in our dentist office when we were children, wrote a long article explaining what this establishment collusion was. And we all saw it with our own eyes. The leaders of both parties in the intelligence community, throughout the corporate media, even longtime Republicans, petrified that Trump's challenges to long-standing bipartisan orthodoxy were too destabilizing and too threatening, not just to the country in their view, but to their power. Did everything they could to ensure he lost, and he still almost won despite that, despite COVID, despite the economic harm from lockdowns and everything else. And yet, as I said, that's still not enough. And the reason it's not enough is in part because they're bloodthirsty. They absolutely believe in the deepest part of their soul that what Donald Trump did in 2016 was criminal. And not just criminal, but one of the worst crimes in American history. Namely, he took the presidency away from its rightful owner, which is Hillary Clinton, and he defaced and vandalized all of the sacred symbols of Washington. And in a way, he actually did do that from their perspective. That is a valid perception. Trump succeeded in shining a light on all sorts of institutions of authority and power that American leaders, in order to become American leaders, essentially and implicitly agree to keep hidden, not to talk about in terms of it being true. From the beginning, during the 2016 campaign, Trump would say things like, the way Washington works is if you're rich like me, you just write a check to anyone that you need a favor from, and the minute you write that check, they get on the phone and they say, hello, Mr. Trump, what can I do for you? Things that you're not supposed to say and really aren't allowed to say if you want to be an American leader. He questioned the viability of NATO. He mocked the intelligence community. He disputed all sorts of bipartisan tenets, including whether the United States should be going around the world changing governments at our whim. He head-on attacked free trade agreements and the entire institution of global neoliberalism. And on a lot of those things, he didn't carry through, whether because he was incapable or undisciplined or got surrounded by people who deceived him through flattery and other exploitation of flaws in his character, all things that are on his ledger. But whether it's because of inability or a lack of effort or just simply the fact that, as supporters of Barack Obama claimed, you really can't take on these permanent power establishments easily, even if you do try. Whatever the reason is, he failed to carry through on a lot of those things. But the fact that he even said those things was very menacing to institutions of power and authority. And you can see in polling data, we will show you, the profound changes that had on the Republican Party in terms of how it viewed Wall Street and crony capitalism and the CIA and the FBI and Homeland Security and other American institutions of power, on war, on militarism, on corporatism. But so in part, the reason why they weren't content with having him declared the loser of the 2020 election and Biden inaugurated is in part because they're just so bloodthirsty. They fed on a narrative for years that Trump is essentially a Hitler-like figure. And if you come to believe that, as most of them did, by them I mean liberal elites, elites who work in these institutions of authority I was just describing, that Time Magazine described, you want that person's destruction. You crave it and need it. It's a moral imperative. It's you go to watch a film and the bad guy has to die at the end, or has to be in some way stopped and destroyed and humiliated. And that's all they've been feeding on for years. That's what modern mainstream entertainment has become. It's what late night TV is. It's not just political shows. It's everywhere in the cultural ethos. People watch anything with Hollywood. That's all that you hear. Everything is based on this premise. The only admission ticket to decent liberal society is that you affirm that Trump is a singular evil, not a reflection of American pathology, not a symptom of it, but the cause of it, the author of it. And that anything and everything that can be done should be done in order to destroy him. That was the notorious Sam Harris video that went viral precisely because he so perfectly and honestly articulated his rationale for why he thinks like things like censorship and even disinformation are justified, because Trump is such an evil that no other evil even compares to it, and therefore it makes it inherently justified. So part of it is they believed in their own morality play, but the other part is they are petrified, for obvious reasons, that Trump will return, that he will run again, as he's doing, and that he will win. It is almost certain that if Joe Biden survives and is still living at the time that 2023 comes around and then into 2024, he will be the Democratic nominee. That means that if Trump gets the nomination, and polls currently at least show him with a very large lead to do so, you could take some of those with a grain of salt. Around this time in 2000, for the 2008 election cycle, Rudy Giuliani had a 15 or 20 point lead for the Republican nomination. He didn't get close to that once it actually began. So you take this with a grain of salt, but Trump has already proven. Trump's not Rudy Giuliani. He's actually been the Republican nominee. He was the Republican president. He's ran twice and is going to run again. There's a lot more of a track record for people's opinions of him to be fixed and not subject to easy change. That means that Trump is likely to be the Republican nominee, and he's going to run against an 82-year-old Joe Biden, who, if he wins and is reelected, will be 86, 4 years short of 90, at the time that his second term ends. So when you combine the fact that Trump almost won in 2020 against Biden, even by the official numbers, and that he had to run despite everything that I've described, and then you add to that that Joe Biden will then be the incumbent responsible for all of America's ills, not somebody who can credibly claim to be the opponent to the status quo. He will be the status quo. It is, anybody rational or serious would have to admit, at least highly likely, if not probable, that Trump will get reelected in 2024. And there is no sure way to stop that, except by criminally charging him and indicting him, prosecuting him, and convicting him of a crime. And that's what happened today. That's what this is about, obviously. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.